Welcome back. Let's take you to the biggest international story to make headlines today. Mourners lined the streets of the British capital, saying their last goodbyes to Queen Elizabeth II. A state funeral service was held earlier today at Westminster Abbey in London. From there, the procession headed to Windsor Castle, where a committal service was held at St. George's Chapel. The Queen will be laid to rest in a private ceremony at the King George VI Memorial Chapel. For more, I'm joined live from Windsor by our UK correspondent, Olly Barratt. Olly, I understand that around 7:30, that private ceremony got underway.
That's right, and we don't really know very much about it, and so it may well have finished. It may be over, but it was due to start around 45 minutes ago, yes, here in Windsor. The committal service that took place earlier in the day here at Windsor was very much public in the sense that the television cameras were there. We got to see those elements of the service that have never been televised before, but the ceremony later in the evening was described as a deeply personal occasion by the royal family. No cameras allowed in for that one. So in a sense, the committal service here earlier in Windsor was, for the public anyway, the final goodbye to the Queen, and that was part of the reason I think that so many people had turned out here in Windsor and, as you were saying, along the route from London to Windsor to say their final goodbyes as the hearse made its journey on the roads and then in that procession up towards and into Windsor Castle.
And I've been a little earlier on Windsor, and we've got some visuals of what was happening across the streets of London showing right now on the telly. And, you know, a little earlier on, after the Archbishop of Canterbury, that's Justin Webley, after his ceremony, there was a moment of silence I saw for about 2 minutes throughout the UK. Those visuals were phenomenal. Just tell me more about that particular moment where the entire country was mourning Queen Elizabeth.
That's right, a 2-minute national service. It actually followed a 1-minute national silence, the night before. So on a couple of occasions now in the last 24 hours, the country really has stopped to come together and reflect after the death of Queen Elizabeth, and largely impeccably well observed. Very much here in Windsor it was, and after the silence we did see rounds of applause and cheers breaking out at various points, particularly as the coffin and the hearse moved through the streets of West London here to Windsor. And here in Windsor, through the day, officials were saying, don't come, stay at home, watch it on television. Windsor is already full. That was the message from pretty early in the morning here, but actually people continued to come because they wanted to be here, even if they couldn't make it up right to the Long Walk, which is that road leading up through Windsor Great Park to Windsor Castle. Even if they couldn't get there and see the final stages of the procession and the Queen's final journey to Windsor, they wanted to be in the town. They wanted to be here for this moment of history. That was similar as to what we saw in London as well. Thousands and thousands of people just wanted to be there in the vicinity, trying to catch a final sight of the Queen and her coffin if they could, but if not, just wanting to feel part of the occasion, part of an historic moment. There were all those dignitaries gathered in London for that service, including, of course, President Ramaphosa. When we got to the service here in Windsor, the committal service, it was a slightly more personal affair, a smaller congregation. Many of the congregation were people who either currently work for or have previously worked in the royal household, and various elements of the service here in Windsor were very personal to the Queen as well. One of the hymns, for example, was chosen by Prince Philip, her late husband, for his funeral, and she had chosen that one to go in this service here.
And that's what I was going to talk about with you, Olly, the fact that, you know, even the Psalms, for instance, Psalm 191, which, by the way, is also one of my favorites, you know, the Psalms that were also forming part of this entire program, I understand, were chosen by the Queen herself. Those are her favorite Psalms in the Bible.
Yes, and we know that the Queen played a very active role in the preparations for her funeral. She knew it was going to be a big deal. The preparations have been in the works for decades and were tweaked, really, year by year as officials got together to just make sure that everything was finely tuned and was going to go according to plan and that the Queen would be happy with it. So we can effectively assume that everything that's been included over the last 12 hours or so at that ceremony in Westminster Abbey, but also here in Windsor, have been signed off by the Queen. Some of it was also signed off in the days after her death by the King, King Charles III, but very much the Queen had an active role in all of this, and therefore we did get some of her favourite readings, some of her favourite music as well. We know that there was a couple of pieces of music actually in the committal service here in Windsor that were written by a late organist who also previously, when she was young, taught the Queen how to play piano. So it really was a personal service by the time we got here to Windsor, and the committal service almost felt like a bridge between that grand ceremonial international affair in Westminster and the private affair very much here this evening in Windsor that we won't see. The committal service felt like a bridge really between the two.
And some of the, for instance, Olly, some of the ceremonial things that we saw for the first time, because, I mean, the Queen has been at the helm for 7 decades, and we actually were only getting to see exactly what happens during such a huge funeral such as this one for the first time. I understand that a former spy chief who served, I believe he's the Lord of Chamberlain, and he served her for a while. He had to break his wand of service or something to show the end of an era, etc. So some of those very important symbolic things happening that we have never seen before.
Indeed, and in fact a lot of people have remarked that for them was one of the most poignant moments of the last couple of weeks. That moment when the crown and the sceptre were removed from the coffin and placed onto the coffin, as you say, was that wand of office by the Lord Chamberlain, effectively the Queen's head of staff, head of the royal household. The wand of office is a symbol these days, but going back years it would have been used to potentially discipline members of staff who'd stepped out of line, and the breaking of that wand of office being placed onto the coffin to be buried with her symbolised really the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and the move into a new era. And so the removal of the crown and sceptre and the placing of the wand of office on the coffin, as I say, for many people was a pretty emotional moment, because it really did signify the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth, and that was the point at which she was then laid to rest in the royal vault.
And I'm interested to know, I know that you haven't tallied the numbers yet, Olly. I wonder how many people were there. From where I was watching on the television, it looked like so many people, coming to say goodbye to the Queen. Some actually that we know from South Africa having flown there. So it will be interesting when we speak to you in a few days' time if they're able, if officials are able to tell you, how many people flew to London to experience what was experienced today themselves. But, tell me or describe to me how the streets of Windsor look right now since the private ceremony took over.
Yeah, Windsor's emptying pretty quickly, actually. It's been really busy all day. It was very busy from early this morning. As I say, even when those messages were going out from local authorities for people to perhaps think about staying at home and watching it on television because the town was getting so busy, it was effectively full at one point. But since the events have ended and since the cameras have not been allowed access to any further parts of proceedings, the town's emptying pretty quickly. People will tell you different things. They'll tell you that they came here to say thank you to the Queen, or they came here for a moment of quiet reflection. They'll tell you they travelled just from round the corner, or they travelled, as you were saying, from much further overseas. But it's very rare that you speak to anyone who has been here that doesn't think it was the right thing to do. Many people also I've been struck by over the last 10 days have said when they've been coming out onto the streets of Windsor and London and elsewhere, they've often said they don't really know exactly why they felt so motivated to be here or there or wherever it may be, but they felt that they just wanted to be part of something, and they felt that they wanted to get out and pay their respects to the Queen in some way. And that, I think, has been the truth here in Windsor today as well. Many thousands of people just feeling like they wanted this final opportunity to get out and be a part of what was happening, many of them to say thanks to the Queen in some way, to pay their respects to the Queen in some way, others just wanting to feel like they're a part of a piece of history. And there's no doubt, whichever way you look at it, that this has been an historic day in an historic period for the UK. It's the change of monarch, it's a change of era. That gathering of dignitaries we saw in London may never have been paralleled before. The only decent comparison anyone seems to be able to come up with is Nelson Mandela's memorial. Beyond that, no one can really think of an example when so many dignitaries and world leaders have been in the same place at the same time. And that just fed into the, I think, the feeling from many people that they wanted to get out and be there for some of it.
Olly, thank you very much. I'm sure you had quite a long day. Let's let you go now. Our UK correspondent, Olly Barratt, speaking to us there from Windsor in the UK.